What is going on, beautiful people? Welcome back to the 817 podcast, where we talk about the lovely city of Fort Worth, Texas. We get into politics, business, culture, news. If it impacts you as a Fort Worthian, we discuss it. Today we have a special edition with Colin Allred, former pro football player, civil rights lawyer, and from 2019 to 2025 was a U.S. representative for Texas 32nd District, and also ran against Ted Cruz for Senate in 2024 and is now running against John Cornyn in 2026. Colin, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks for having me.
Yeah, we're really glad you're here. I think we mentioned that we usually ask folks what their Fort Worth story is, and we usually give them a little heads up about that because sometimes people have to think for a minute if it's not their hometown or whatever. But do you have something to share with us about what your Fort Worth story is?
I mean, there's like the Dallas rivalry, so there's that. But I lived here for a year and a half when I was doing voting rights work back in 2014. When Wendy Davis was running for governor. So her headquarters was here in Fort Worth. And so this is where I worked out of the headquarters. I was the voter protection director for North Texas, but I ended up doing most of the state. We set up the first statewide voter protection hotline. That was also the first election after the passage of the very strict voter ID bill. And so there was just so much chaos. And I think you might remember this, it was sometimes simple stuff like married women whose names had changed, didn't match the ID anymore, or folks who just, for whatever reason, their ID had expired. With sometimes seniors who wanted to vote in person, didn't drive anymore, might have an expired ID, and it was just, and the election judges, it was chaos in terms of the implementation, and so that was a crazy election. But I lived here for a while and enjoyed it, and as a Dallas guy, I can say that honestly.
Yeah. Well, what's interesting about that is we actually are dealing with a lot from Tarrant County around voter integrity and voter fraud, and spending a lot of tax dollars on that today, and it's just going to waste because they're not really finding anything. So what's kind of your feelings of how we should be respecting vote, and then also the narrative around that there's all these fraud votes in ballots?
It's just nonsense.
Yeah.
You're more likely to be struck by lightning than for there to be in-person voter fraud, right? But what I think we need to talk more about is that they're trying to rig elections before anyone ever goes to cast a ballot. I mean, you've seen this with your county commissioner court here, where they're trying to gerrymander the commissioner's court and say, well, we don't want them to have enough representation, so obviously it's gerrymandering. I'm sure we'll talk about that more, but it's not just that. As a voting rights lawyer, some of the things that I found most frustrating were the restrictions on voter registration, where if I want to register you as my neighbor, right, I got to go down to one of the county buildings and get deputized as what they call a VDR, which sounds kind of strange, but a volunteer deputy registrar is what it stands for. That registration will last for 2 years. If I register you, I have to write down your information. I have to keep a little slip from it. I have to turn that slip in your voter registration card within, I think it's still 5 days. They might have changed it since I was doing this in person a lot. If I don't, I can face criminal penalties.
It's a felony, too.
It's a felony.
It's so intense.
It's crazy. Yeah. It's crazy. To register your neighbor? Yeah. Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
What we're talking about here, the county and the state are going to then take that form and determine if you're eligible, right?
Yeah.
So it's on them to determine your eligibility. So it's not like you can just get falsely registered, because they're the ones who are going to go through and see, are you on papers, right? Which means if you've had a felony, if you finished whatever your sentence is, they're the ones who are going to go and see, are you ineligible, are you a citizen, right? It's the responsibility is on them to determine your eligibility. And then that's before you get into the closing of polling places, the messing with hours and locations, the voter ID law itself, gerrymandering. At every single element of voting, they're trying to make it difficult. And, to me, we're the only democracy in the world that does this. We're the only democracy in the world that doesn't want its own citizens to vote. It's mandated in Australia.
Yes, I was in Australia during an election one time, and our friends had kids that were turning 18, and if you don't vote, you get penalized. Right. You get fined for not voting.
And
where you're automatically registered and you're automatically sent a ballot in the mail.
Yeah. Right. And just think about this. Imagine a scenario where if we were truly serious about our democracy, where when you turn 18, you're given a voter registration card and said you're automatically registered, that wherever you go, we're going to track your registration status for you. We're going to ensure that, because we know who you are, we've given you a social security card number, we should give you a voter registration number. We've also, if you're male, we've given you a selective service number. So when you turn 18, you're registered for the draft. So we know we can do this, right? And that we make sure that that it's a government service to make sure you know where to vote, when to vote, how to vote, and that you're encouraging people that Election Day is a national holiday, right? And that you're encouraging people to be involved in their democracy. And if they don't vote under all that, fine, right? But let's at least give them a chance. And so obviously you can tell I get fired up about it, but like it's just, to me, there is a scenario where we can go in the other direction. And I actually think that, when I was in Congress, we were not that far away from passing a bill called the For the People Act that would have banned gerrymandering, that would have expanded voting and affirmatively passed some laws to protect the right to vote. We passed it out of the House of Representatives. I was a key part of that. We tried to get it through the Senate, but we couldn't because of the filibuster. And to be honest, and a lot of why we're here today with this stealing of 5 congressional seats in Texas is because we didn't pass that legislation. And I do blame the folks who wouldn't allow us to do it in the Senate.
So I think that you've run once before, and I think a lot of the focus on that campaign was kind of on fundraising and online ads and that sort of thing. And I think we've heard from some people on this side of the Metroplex that didn't see as much of you. I think you've definitely upticked that, having an event here with Wendy Davis and then having an event here with Mark Vesey. And I think you were out at Como Fest, so definitely have noticed a presence here in Tarrant County. Do you have plans in this campaign to do kind of outreach to more of that grassroots, which I know that Jared Williams was the person that sent me information about tonight. Jared, yeah. And I know that in his race for city council, he was knocking doors and connecting with people in the community, like very much one-on-one. And I know your race is a lot bigger than a city council race, but do you have some plans to do anything different?
I mean, number one, I was a member of Congress in the last election, and we had an incredibly closely divided House where every vote counted, right? And not just votes on the floor, but committee votes. And if you can imagine, just like now, where if 2 or 3 votes go a different way, a bill passes or doesn't pass. Right, and so that was incredibly restrictive in the last election, but I am proud that we outran our presidential ticket by the most votes of any Senate race in the country. It turned out to be a year that was in a lot of ways just went the wrong way. What I think I want to do in this election is show people, not tell them. Yeah. And so, my background is that I was raised by a single mother, went to public school. Relied on a community to be able to play football at Baylor and become captain of the team, make it to the NFL, all the things that you said, right? And so, that background is one that I think we now I want to spend as much time as I can talking to working people. And that's difficult, to be honest with you, in campaigns, because working people can't come to a rally. Yeah. My mom couldn't have come to a rally. With all the best will in the world, loving a candidate, she wouldn't be able to go. Because she was teaching during the day, she would do homework hotline in the evening, and then she'd have to watch me, right? And so she wouldn't have been able to go to a rally. And so that means that we have to, I think, go to people. And so that's what I'm really excited about, some of the plans we have to really try and find a way to make it so that we're as accessible as possible. And I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think so. We're Fort Worth heavy. We've done over 230 episodes weekly dissecting this city. And our belief is that Tarrant County is the battleground of our democracy, and Fort Worth is the front lines. But what we're seeing here in Fort Worth that maybe you're seeing across the state is what is the voice of the Democratic Party? And even just yesterday, we had 2 tough votes, one at the county level and one at the city level. At the county level, we had one Dem, Commissioner Miles, vote with Judge Tim O'Hare on removing human resources from the county, which left Elisa Simmons, the lead-lone Democrat, holding that stand. And then at the city council level, we're the majority at city council in Fort Worth. Most people don't know that, Democrat.
Yeah, no, I know.
Two of the 6 moved away from supporting DEI initiatives, backing down to Donald Trump's executive order to dismantle those things. And so I feel like we're in this weird middle where I feel like back when you did this in 2024, the idea of collaboration with Republicans made a lot of sense. But in the fight that we're in now, where it feels like it's about punching first and having power, how do you see changing that or moving through that now with just who the Republican Party is today?
Yeah, and I am proud that we won Tarrant County as well, which was something that we've only done a couple times in recent elections. But listen, everything's different now. Don't you think?
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, I feel differently.
Yeah.
I'm somebody who has spent my career trying to find common ground, not because I think that it's just that's the end goal of itself, but the end goal, as you know, is to pass legislation. And to do that, I need 218 votes in the House, I need 60 votes in the Senate, I need a president who will sign it, and that's tough, right? And that means that it needs to be broadly appealing and need to get bipartisan buy-in. And I'm proud of the work that I did to do that. I was actually the most bipartisan member of the Texas delegation, while also being an outspoken, advocate for democracy and civil rights, right? So it's possible to do that. But I think everything has changed in this time because, look what they're doing right now with this redistricting. You said punching first. They're punching and saying, just deal with it. Yeah. We're going to steal 5 seats. We're not going to give you a rationale.
We're not even going to give you maps while you're talking about it.
That's true. We're not going to give you maps. That's a good point because you want to take testimony, but you've already got the maps, right? Yeah. When I first started doing voting rights, it was so much more subtle. In fact, we almost sometimes had a hard time showing people what the impact of a law would be. You'd have to bring in statisticians, you'd have to bring in experts who could tell you that X number of people don't have this type of ID, and when you do this part slides on the kind of the abacus of voting. Now it's just so blatant that you don't need any of that, and they just come out and say it. And so I do think that everything has changed, but I don't think that what we can abandon is the idea that most people are sitting there thinking, I hope that elected officials are thinking about me and my family first. Right? And that comes down to the meat and potatoes of what people think about when they're sitting down at home at night, which is, what are we going to do if grandma gets sick? How are we going to send our kid to a good school? What are we going to do about that car that we know we can't fix, but it's still running, and we're going to run it into the ground, right? That's how I grew up. And I think that that's what we have to speak to, because there were a lot of promises made to working people in the last election by the Republican Party, saying that they're going to be on their side in a high inflation environment, they're going to lower their costs. And what did they do when they got the power? They did the exact opposite. They've raised their costs. This is going to be a very expensive Christmas for working families because of these tariffs. And this bill that they passed is going to raise your energy costs. It's going to raise healthcare costs for folks, particularly if you're in the individual market. 4 million Texans are. They're going to have over 20% spike in their insurance premiums. And it's going to kick 1.7 million Texans off their healthcare and Medicaid cuts. All for what? To cut taxes for the rich, right? And so I think we have to talk to working people and make sure they understand that, number one, we can and you deserve somebody who wants to be on your side. And number two, that I know exactly what we need to do that. I know where the pressure points are, that we can lower your healthcare costs. We should have healthcare for every single Texan, that it should be affordable, and that's in the interest of everyone that you're covered. That we can lower your child care costs. We can cap the cost of your child care. For working families, it's one of the biggest expenses that they have. There's a reason, as you know, why pre-K is so important. It's also about workforce involvement, right, and workforce engagement, because once those kids hit pre-K, it can increase, right? That we can cap your childcare costs. That we know housing costs are going up, and that people are being forced out of their homes. We can both help keep people in their homes and first-time home buyers get a home, so we control those costs. These are things that are within reach, right? But we have to, I think, talk about it. And so, yes, there's the partisan fights, but we're going to have some of those. But I genuinely believe in my heart that most people don't want, they get sick of the fighting. They want to hear, what's your plan for how you're going to help me and my family? And if we don't articulate that, it doesn't matter if we've been clapping back good on Twitter or whatever, that's not going to win the election.
Yeah, it's challenging. I was in a nonpartisan seat for years, and so I very much clung to that, trying to be nonpartisan in everything that I did. I felt like the policies that I was supporting and working towards were good for people. Yeah. And so I think that working towards policies that are good for people is what you need to do. But to the point that sometimes the other side will come up with these sound bites that are just so easy, and the explanation on the policy side is so much more challenging. So I think it's important to be able to figure out that narrative, to be able to clap back a little bit.
You have to clap back, but it has to be substantive. I think we are never going to be, at least when I say we, I should say, I think folks who want to propose solutions, it's, LBJ would say, any jackass can knock down a barn, but it takes a carpenter to build one, right? It's easier to tear stuff down than it is to build it up. And it's also easier to message about that.
Yeah.
So, but we have to take on that burden and say, but we're going to do it anyway,
Yeah. I really want to get this question right around the Latino vote. Republicans have their money on the Latino vote. Democrats continue to lose voters and do not provide enthusiasm to younger Latino voters. Many think Latinos are going Republican, but in fact, we see many Latino communities not engaging at all. South Texas, for example, had the majority of registered voters not vote. 49% turned out to vote in South Texas, and in Webb County, where Laredo is, only 44% turned out. Do you think you can be the candidate to activate the Latino vote? How do you plan to engage and serve their needs, this large and diverse community?
Such a good point and such a good question. And I want to point out that there was a huge difference between what was happening at the presidential level, where, particularly in South Texas and the Valley, where Donald Trump won many of those counties, or almost all of them, and at the Senate level, where I won them. In some counties, I outran our presidential ticket, like in Duval County, by 17 points. Right, and so I want to point that out because I do think that it's important to note that some of this, I think, was particularly evident in, I think, what was a frustration around what was the administration was doing around the border or what they hadn't done, and I think in a high inflation environment, just like a frustration around that they didn't respond to well enough. So some of this, I think, is, when I hear some of these narratives, I think it's kind of true, but it's also kind of not, right? But I think that when we're talking about the Latino vote, Hispanics in Texas, I think about it the same way as I do, anybody, that we have to present, as I said before, plans that will matter for them, meet them where they are, and make sure they understand, what we want to do and what we can do together. And to me, that fundamentally revolves around the economy, the American dream, whether that's accessible, an appreciation for work, and if you have ideas that can help, folks who want to work hard, take advantage of those. And I don't think it's not that different from group to group. Now, obviously there's some other elements that I think have been introduced under this administration. For example, we've seen this mass kind of crackdown in terms of deportation. We've always had removal proceedings in this country. We've always had deportations in this country, but you should do it consistent with the law. You should do it with due process being observed. And the reason we do that is not because of the character of the people who are being processed. In fact, it almost has nothing to do with them. It's about us. We treat people well, and we treat people according to the law because of who we are, right? And I find it to be incredibly frustrating that we have moved away from that as a country. And when I see people being shipped off to a gulag because of their tattoos, with no hearing, and they're actually, a hairdresser, or they have a tattoo for, awareness around something one of their siblings has. I forget if it was
autism.
It was autism awareness, right? I think that's not our country. It doesn't happen here. We can have proceedings where folks may have to leave the country who came here illegally. That's happened for decades. But let's do it consistent with the law and treat people right. And that, I think, we have to talk about, not just for the Latino community, because it also impacts across communities, that in a decent society, the way you treat people says more about you than them. And that's what I think we need to remember.
Yeah. Well, for our last question, I really want to kind of just hyper on a lot of our strategy in the podcast. We believe, the power of the 5 big blue cities. I think what's unfortunate about these big blue cities is that they're not fully has a lot of dynamism yet. So for instance, right, Fort Worth's a great example where we have a Republican mayor but we have 6 Democrat seats, but we're not sure how are they willing to flex their values. Same kind of in Dallas, Houston, but you're seeing San Antonio starting to kind of elevate in a certain lane. And I think these cities are so oftentimes, I guess, left out in the narrative of chasing rural voters. Hey, let's read every county. People looking to get the Republican voter. When I look at cities like Fort Worth, for example, I live in District 11, and of our 11 districts, I guess 10 districts, the 6 Democrat districts, last presidential election got equal amount of votes as the 4 Republican districts. So there's a clearly like this, when we look at working class, black and brown, poor communities, like this lack of excitement or connection to today's Democrats. And so what is your take on like how do we actually activate and engage?
Because I have something to add on to that question too, is like people think that Texas is a red state, but it's a non-voting state. Right. And you know well aware that a lot of that is because of awful things that Republicans have done to make it hard to vote. And they've been so successful in the propaganda that your vote doesn't matter. Like, we know the outcome. Yeah. But there's so many people in Fort Worth and Tarrant County in Texas that just feel so disillusioned from the political divide or the, things not getting delivered. And how do you plan to excite people and make them feel that change is like we're on the cusp of change, like it is within their grasp to make a difference?
I think that does come back to what we were saying earlier, which is we have to show, not tell. But I want to also set the scene a little bit, which is that following the 2018 election, when we had competitive races all around the state house races where we flipped 12, state senate races where we flipped several, congressional races where we flipped 2 but had 5 others that were competitive. They gerrymandered every single level of our elections. And so other than a few local elections, you will often not have a competitive election in your area, right? And there's a reason for that. It's also so they can have power, but it's also because it suppresses the vote. Because there's less campaigns that are locally turning out the vote. We all know this. As much will in the world, your statewide campaign is not going to be in your community every single day. Right? Even if they want to, right? But your local candidates would be. And when I was running for Congress in 2018, we were turning out that vote in North Texas, in Dallas, in Garland, in Richardson, and that helped uptick it, right? And so I do want to just note that it's the entire element that contributes to us being a non-voting state, right? It's the laws, but it's also the feeling and the reality in some cases that, okay, what am I going to do? And so that's what we have to overcome. But that's okay. We have to understand what the playing field is and accept it, right? And you can't sit here and just cry about it. We have to do something about it. As we used to always say, don't agonize, organize, right? So we have to accept that. But what I think we need to do is, while we know that we might not have as many local competitive races, we need to build truly integrated campaigns that are coordinated locally, so that, to the extent possible, you're hearing from your county party, from your local folks, even if they're not in a competitive race, that they're turning out their people. And that is something that's been a frustration for me at times, that we're not every, even when I didn't have competitive races, I would still be trying to turn out the vote. But I think it's also true that to do that, you have to share resources, you have to share data. And so this is tactical. But I think on top of that, strategy-wise, what we have to do, I think, is grind it out. And that's what I'm excited about the opportunity to do in this election, which is to go into communities and talk to people and show people. And even if you're not going to be able to be there every day, that you can at least be evident that this is what can change, right? And yes, it's policies. I actually think the policy is very important. And I think we need to talk about what policies will help working people, what policies will help lower their costs, will give them a better opportunity to get ahead. But then I think it's also showing that you care. And so, I think that, across the state, what we're seeing is that just like in 2018, there's a backlash building to what they're doing, right? And so what we have to do is take advantage of that in this midterm. This will not be an election like the last one, where all the frustration was directed at the Biden administration and what are they doing and not doing. Listen, they own this, right? This is their economy. That's a too high price environment. They're the ones who've been, in my opinion, breaking the law and doing unconstitutional actions. They're the ones who I think are making people feel like it's just a chaotic situation where you never know what's going to happen. And so now we have to step in and say, this is what we can do about it, right? And so it's a very different environment, but to build that backlash, it's things like what we're going to do tonight. which is at a black church, talking about the 60th anniversary of the Voting Rights Act, and that it's under attack, and that while they might not be sicking dogs on us and cracking your skull like they did to my friend John Lewis when he walked across the Edmund Pettus Bridge anymore, they are still, the same forces are still trying to prevent you from voting in other ways, right? And build that backlash, because working people and folks who have a lot going on in their lives, this is something that just the idea of democracy as it on itself is not enough, right? But what that democracy then allows you to get or not get, I think, is enough, right? And so I believe we're going to have a good election, but we have to make it happen.
Well, Congressman Allred, thank you for joining the 817 podcast. We really appreciate you spending time on a local Fort Worth podcast.
Yeah, I love it. This is great.
Yeah,
Y'all are awesome.
So
I appreciate you for doing this.